Hi everyone, I'm Rob Silberstein. I'm one of the Law Hack champions. I'm championing it together with my fellow colleague Steve Caston, who I'll introduce a bit later on. And I'm here to introduce everyone to the kickoff event for the inaugural National Justice Project Law Hack 2021 Disability Justice. This is a really exciting event because, at least for me, I'm a happily married man with 4 daughters, and I have a physical disability. I use a wheelchair for mobility, and all my life I have championed the cause of people with disabilities and to improve justice for them. And it has always been my view that there is a need for the law to engage in ensuring that there is justice for people with disabilities. So this is an incredible opportunity and I'm very excited to be here. I'd like to invite Auntie Glendra Stubbs, the Elder in Resident at the Jumbana Institute, to acknowledge country. Glendra?
Thank you, Rod. Such an honour to be in the presence of a law champion for justice. Justice is something that I've been very passionate for people with disabilities for all my life, really. So, in my acknowledgement, my acknowledgement to country will start by paying respects to the traditional owners on the land we virtually meet, and say thanks for allowing us to be here. I also pay respects to the knowledge embedded forever within Aboriginal custodianship of country. I pay respects to elders past and acknowledge their strengths. Shh, Lionel. Sorry. Lionel, out. So sorry about that. Lionel Rose did not pay attention. So I was up to pay respects to elders past and acknowledge their strengths, and also emerging elders. Also respect for our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters who walk together with us on this journey of truth, justice and healing. Yalamandu Marang, as Rob said, I'm the elder at Jumbana, and it's a great honour to be working there. I've also worked on the Royal Commission into Institutionalised Child Sexual Abuse, and at No More Legal Service doing redress for survivors of child abuse. And a lot of our clients have disabilities, so you know, and they're hard to engage with. Aboriginal people are hard to engage with. You have to be really kind and patient, and get people's trust for people to engage in something so personal and so private. I'm also intellectual disability rights. I'm the elder advisor, and that's a real honour as well. And the Royal Commission into Disabilities advisor for the panel of access and equity studies for parents with disabilities. I mean, people with disabilities are one of our most disadvantaged people in the country. We have a long way to go. I want to thank the social justice warriors, all the legal people that walk with our beautiful people. And I also want to share a little story about a young girl who I supported to do her public hearing to the Royal Commission of Disabilities, and just acknowledge her bravery. And it was another level of bravery to talk about being a young parent with a disability to have your children removed. So I just think, you know, when Rob said he's a champion, yous are all champions. You are all social justice warriors, and we have started the conversation, and I'm so proud to be here with such beautiful people and such passionate champions for social justice. Let the conversation start. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Glendra. That was a beautiful comment to start with. And the The Law Hack's going to be a unique event. It's going to bring together bright minds, passionate hearts, and brilliant professionals from the legal community and advocacy sectors for one purpose: to tackle injustices facing Australians living with disabilities and groundbreaking legal solutions. It's really special because, as Glendra put it, there's a lot of people who are very brave but aren't listened to very well. And I just want to pick up on the importance of what Auntie Glendra said about building trust. There's a real need in the disability sector for trust to be built because people with disabilities are not getting access to the kinds of justice that they need. The Law Hack wouldn't be possible without the incredible support from our community partners, event catalysts, donors and sponsors, and we really can't thank any of you enough for that. Tonight is just a taster for what's to come on Friday, the 22nd of October, and what you're going to hear over the next little while is about the key players within a Law Hack and how it works. Let's get started with our keynote Q&A with disability advocate Justin Thomas from the Council of Intellectual Disabilities and Damian Griffiths, the CEO of the First Peoples Disability Network.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Damian Griffiths. I'm the CEO of the First Peoples Disability Network Australia, national organisation representing First Nations people with disability. And I'm joined today by my great friend, Justin Thomas, who's joining me today for a bit of a Q&A on a range of different things. Obviously, ideally, Justin, we prefer to do this in person, but in the world we live in today, doing these things online is what we have to get used to. But I thought I might begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on whose land we're speaking from. I'm speaking to you from a Wabikal Warramai country in Newcastle, and like to pay special mention to two of our founding elders, Uncle Lester Bostock and Auntie Gail Rankin, who are no longer with us, but were two important pioneers for the social movement of First Nations people with disability, and we always like to acknowledge them. And I'd also like to probably, apologise to the audience. Normally we'd be doing this in person. It is online. It's not quite ideal. I've still got my scruffy lockdown hair, as you can see, and
yeah.
It's a bit all over the shop, but really thank you, Justin, for doing this with me. I guess the last time we did something like this, and we can show off now, was at the United Nations in Geneva when we did this.
Geneva was great, wasn't it? Great experience here, first time for most people there.
It was, wasn't it? And we had a huge audience to talk to there, and that was something I'll never forget. And your powerful advocacy and leadership, Justin, is something you should all be proud. You should be proud of, and all of us as First Nations people are very proud of the work you do, and for the strong leadership you show. So
we got to keep fighting. Otherwise, we're never going to stay in Australia, should we? We've got to keep,
Absolutely. Very well said. So I've got a few questions I just want to ask you, Justin. I think we've got a little bit of a delay on our Wi-Fi here, and we've got some stormy weather here in Newcastle, so I think that might be affecting things a little bit. But I just wondered if you might sort of tell us a bit about your story, Justin. I know that you've been such a strong spokesperson and advocate around issues for people with disability, particularly in prison, and that's your own personal experience, and you saw the discrimination that many people with disability face in the prison and justice systems. Do you mind telling me a little bit about what that was like for you when you were in prison?
As I said, I actually, my background, I grew up in an Aboriginal community area, which is edge out of Campbell, which the mob there is terrible. I believe my mob is linked to Darrig mob at Parramatta. But then it was all a small community was targeted by law enforcement, and being singled out, whether we're black, white, or grey, especially a person like me, being out in the streets, being vulnerable to the public, and getting locked up every week in the juvenile justice centres and all that. That led to outstanding fines I couldn't afford to pay, and sleeping on trains, and when you're homeless, sleeping in parks, and you get move-on orders and all these ridiculous things that's happening by the police, their attitude. Yeah. So I ended up spending most of my life, like probably 30 years of my life, in and out of prison.
Yeah. And that, and I can remember from when we were in Geneva together, and you sharing your story is so powerful, and thank you again for doing that. And I want to acknowledge that it's not always an easy thing to do, but telling your story, it's so important for people to hear, and people from all around the world for that matter, and that's what you did over at the United Nations in Geneva. And can I say how proud of it was for me to see you do that, and again say thank you for sharing this story. What were some of the difficulties you faced when you were in jail? What was life like for you?
Mainly first Australians getting picked on by law enforcement and the staff and all that, and even treated unfairly and all that. I've actually had someone commit suicide a few cells away from me in the cell, and that was so traumatic to experience an Aboriginal man to commit suicide and all that. I don't know what led him to all that, but and I just think that people don't realise that a lot of us fellas growing up in the rough areas, and that we've got trauma in us that we haven't found ourselves. We're lost out there due to our mental health or disability. And for the law enforcement and all that to prey on people like us to be able to find a reason to lock us up and all that, there's no excuses where you could have just been simple solution is that we need help. Don't judge us.
Yeah, beautifully said, Justin. What about when you were a young person in Aids and around Campbelltown? Did you get much support? Was there many options for you? Was there things to do? It was really tough. And what about
the only school at the time? It's a rough school too. I was getting bullied. When I started high school, I realised that the older years were getting that I was getting targeted by bullies and all that, and also getting chased after school. And because I didn't have a father in at the time, and it just seemed to be that led to a lot of people to do drugs in that, because there was kind of an area that led to people doing drugs and alcoholism and all that for school.
Yeah. And you said before, Justin, that there wasn't a lot of help around mental health. There wasn't a lot of help around, I guess, when you're in prison too, they don't necessarily think of things like that. So, bad and awful things happen while you're there. And I don't imagine you get much help for, mental health and other things while you're there. Is that right?
That's true. And the only thing I want to say is that if the community corrective services think you got problems, then they refer you to psychiatrists, and they're in the jail, not the outside ones, but in the prison, some that they don't know anything about me. And I'm not going to tell them exactly for them to find out, you know what I mean? So a lot of kids back then were silent.
Yes.
And we're all brought up to be silent towards the law enforcement, the government job service people and all that. And especially at the time I was taken away by docs. I was taken away by docs to kids' refuge, and that hurt me the most. And the saying is that how dare them to move me from my home into a kids' refuge.
Yeah. And what was life like for you in that refuge? You're obviously away from family, and I imagine that was a very difficult time. What was that like for you, Justin?
Very traumatic. I had no one to talk to, and the only person at the time I could talk to is my grandmother. She understands. She's born that she didn't like the idea of me being in between kids' refuges in the streets. Yeah. Because I was discriminated by docs because of my disability, and they let me go all these years without my medication, without treating me. I was going a lot of years without medication too. That should have been treated. Yeah. And a lot of that reflected my behaviour, which led me to hanging around the wrong crowd and go and commit crime, which leads me to go in and out of jail all the time. Yeah.
So would it be fair to say you didn't have a lot of kind of support around, you didn't have a lot of people that understood your disability well? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. I had no one at the time, and I was in and out of kids' refuges in the streets and being picked up by law enforcement. Outstanding fines, again, locked me up again.
Yeah. So just in and out all the time.
Yeah, it was like that.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of other kids, first Australian kids, to be going through that similar thing as well.
Yeah. Which leads me to the next question, Justin. Like I said at the beginning, you're a wonderful leader and a powerful presence, and your personal story is so important for people to hear. And you've taken that message to the other side of the world. And again, I admire your leadership. Tell us a bit about some of the work you've been doing lately. You do some work for the Council of Intellectual Disability, and you've worked on the Justice Matters campaign.
Yeah, and got a campaign, didn't we? I mean, I had a few meetings with the Attorney General. Met the Prime Minister once, but that was for something different. But yeah, at least the CIDP program got the funding. Yeah. It was a big effort. I think in my case, that's lucky that we got that funding and we'd be able to move ahead with that kind of stuff for younger generations and that.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to push it for a national issue, not a state issue. Because we realize that other brothers and sisters across the nation need that kind of help too, not just our state.
Yeah, that's a great point, Justin. And we know how much of an issue this is, often a hidden issue in many ways. We do know that there's many of our people with disability across prisons across the country who shouldn't be there. And
reflecting is, I don't mean rude, but a lot of those government jobs back then, a lot of racism was hidden within the government jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was big time.
Institutional racism, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, but also you've got the other thing around, disability discrimination too. So you got both kind of forms of discrimination, eh? So what I did want to just say as we sort of finish up now is say, again, thank you for your leadership, Justin, and your powerful advocacy and for speaking out. And that you're always available to share your experience and your knowledge. And I think You've got so much to say, and very proud of you, brother, the way you do things and the way you speak up. And thank you for your time today. And I think you've raised a number of really critical issues that will set the scene for this Law Hack event. And again, thank you, brother. Very proud of you. And, we'll see you in person soon, eh?
That's it, after COVID.
Yeah, please. It's been too long, eh?
It's been a few years.
It has. But thanks again, brother, and we'll catch up with you soon, eh?
No worries. Have a good Christmas if I don't see you before then.
Well, let's hope we do, eh? All right. See you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks very much, Justin, for being such an incredible storyteller and a real disability rights champion. We need more people like that all the time. And Damian, thanks very much to you for being such a great advocate and bringing out so many important messages that Justin can give. A few points that I took from it was that people have failed to listen, that Justin grew up without support and rather he was bullied. And he was, most importantly, perhaps he was brought up to be silent to the authorities. Justin, let me say this to you. This law hack is taking a stand against that. We are not going to be silent to the authorities. Here, we are getting together the greatest minds to be able to catch the authorities out and remind them of what's important. And another point that I think you touched on was about racism and disability discrimination. It's pretty common, I think, in the disability sector, and I think the law hack materials that have been circulated to participants shows that there's oftentimes a combination of different kinds of discrimination to which people are affected, and so it's an issue that pervades everything in relation to disability rights as well. So thank you very much again. We've got an exceptional lineup of judges. I think when I last spoke, I mentioned that there's a number of very key players in a law hack. And yes, we've got an exceptional lineup of judges. I'm going to be one of the judges. I'm very lucky to have been given the opportunity to judge. And it's a nice opportunity for me, especially because in addition to being, an advocate of using the law to improve the rights of people with disabilities, I'm a lawyer and a litigator myself. So it's a great honour to be a judge. My fellow judges will be Graham Innes, Margarita Coppolino, Natalie Wade, and Dr. Scott Avery. But I'd now like to invite my co-law hack champion, Steve Caston, to talk to us. He's also the chair of the National Justice Project, by the way, and he's going to share with us the challenge statements, a little bit more about the hack pack, and give us some information on the judging criteria. Steve?
Thanks so much, Rob. Before I go any further, I do note that Justin's powerful but traumatic story may have triggered some feelings in some people. So if there are any issues that have been raised out of that, please contact Lifeline on 131114. Yes, Stephen Caston's my name, and I'm the chair of the National Justice Project. And I'm very proud that we're presenting Law Hack 2021, Disability Justice. Collaboration, innovation, and bravery are the keys to making real, lasting change for those with disabilities. So I'm very excited to champion this event, which will develop real solutions to these important issues. Now, throughout the development of the Law Hack, we worked alongside 6 expert community partners to develop the challenge statements. The First People's Disability Network Australia, the National Ethnic Disability Alliance, Council for Intellectual Disability, Women with Disabilities Australia, People with Disability Australia, and Arts Access Australia, as well as 2 exceptional research partners, Monash University and the University of Technology Sydney Disability Research Network. Now, there are 5 challenge statements that the teams will be tackling during the Law Hack on the 22nd of October, and I'll run through them now. The first one is policing and incarceration. How do we remove the role of police and corrective services in responding to people with cognitive, intellectual, and psychosocial disabilities so that people with disability are not subject to force, violence, and incarceration? 2, healthcare, disability support, and aged care. How can we achieve a rights-based approach in healthcare, disability support services, and aged care so that people with disabilities can receive the support they need while maintaining the rights to autonomy, personal integrity, and legal capacity? 3, rights and law. How can we protect the rights, dignity, and autonomy of people with a disability by eliminating violence such as coercive control and involuntary sterilisation and restrictive practices? 4, education and child protection. How can we ensure that schools and early childhood education providers deliver inclusion and equity in education for children with disabilities so no child's left behind? And 5, housing. How can we ensure people with disability have access to suitable housing so they can live with dignity, freedom, and be connected to supports, friends, and families? So those are the challenge statements. Now, the HACK team has also developed an excellent HACK pack full of resources for you all, which will be provided to you early next week, and you'll be informed about which challenge and which team you've been assigned to, and these challenge statements will be in the HACK packs as well. Now, my next job is to share with you some insights into how your challenge solutions will be evaluated by our panel of expert judges on the 22nd of October, remembering that your legal strategy, draft pleadings, and parallel advocacy strategy will be presented as a concise and succinct 3-minute pitch. The judges will be looking for pitches that reflect the following elements. Courage. Your pitch will be brave, courageous, and strategic, reflecting the ability to change the status quo, whether it be law, policy, culture, and public perception, whilst tackling systemic discrimination. Humility. Your pitch will be underpinned by respect for people with lived experience as the experts, drivers, and catalysts of change. Achievable. Your solutions will be clearly defined, practical, and set out actionable steps to delivering impact through litigation and advocacy. Novel. Your pitch will be original, creative, and innovative in showing how litigation and advocacy can create positive change for those with disabilities. Grounded. Your pitch will be grounded in the challenge statements and lived experience, and in particular explore the multi-layered nature of disadvantage and discrimination. And finally, evidence. Your pitch will identify research, data, and evidence of need. So make sure you consider these criteria so that you develop the most exciting and innovative solutions to the challenge statement as possible. Now, don't forget, you as participants, the public, your colleagues, and friends are all invited to join the pitch session on the 22nd of October at 4 p.m. And people can register through our website or look up #LawHack2021. So I wish you all the best of luck. I can't wait to find out about the groundbreaking solutions that you'll come up with during the Law Hack. Now back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Steve. Collaboration, innovation, and change. A bunch of very powerful words and very important words, I think, that represent what we need all of the participants to achieve. I'm thrilled to say that we've also got a brilliant lineup of mentors. So in addition to judges, there are mentors who are participating. The mentors are going to support our participants during the hack. As a taster tonight, we have 2 lead mentors who will introduce you to the areas of strategic litigation. Thank you, George Newhouse, and advocacy. Thank you, Katja Makwas. I'd now like to invite George to start by sharing his insights on strategic litigation. Thanks, George.
Thanks, Rob, for your kind and generous words. I'd just like to quickly acknowledge that I am on the unceded land of the Gadigal people today, and I acknowledge their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, many of you today may be experienced lawyers or have some experience with the law. But there's a major difference between strategic litigation and litigation in general. And I think the main difference is that one is proactive, and this isn't a criticism of litigation being proactive. You need to respond to a client's particular problem or need, whereas strategic litigation is reactive. It is reactive. It identifies the need for change and the problem to solve. We then work on developing a holistic plan and finally identify a client to take the journey for change with. Now, a traditional definition of strategic litigation is that it seeks outcomes with long-term impact that go well beyond the origins of the complaint or issue. It's a method of advocacy, and its objectives go beyond the court or the legal system to drive systemic change. It isn't limited to courts. It views litigation broadly to include tribunals, inquiries, even the United Nations and international mechanisms of redress. And at the National Justice Project, we believe that it can and should have some therapeutic value to the individual or the class of individuals that we're working with to seek closure and justice. But of course, as Auntie Glendra mentioned, we're often dealing with people who've been subjected to incredible trauma, and real care has to be taken to avoid doing even more harm by re-traumatizing clients on the way through this journey. It's a complex process, but it can be extremely life-changing and system-changing. So how does it work in practice? At the National Justice Project, we've developed a framework that you will see in practice on the day of the hackathon. So the first issue is to identify a social or human rights issue. And you heard from Steve the 5 issues that have been identified for the hackathon. Together, you consider the appropriate stakeholders and partners, and you bring them in early. Most lawyers have a client to answer to, but when you're looking at strategic litigation, you want advocates. You want people with lived experience. You need people from the sector to be involved at a very early stage so that you can collaborate on a solution and find a way forward. Together, you work to identify legal and other mechanisms to achieve the desired outcome. And it's very important that when you work on these outcomes, that you test them and consider the limitations. You consider the resources that might be required and identify the risks involved, because there are risks with all strategies. You develop a narrative around the case. Lawyers don't do this. They do it for a judge. That's their audience or their client. But often with strategic litigation, you need a narrative for the outside world to drive change. And then finally, you plan and deliver a coordinated advocacy and legal campaign. So how does that work in practice? I thought I might just take you very briefly through the campaign that the National Justice Project ran to get kids off Nauru. And like most strategies, they take time and patience and understanding to develop. But the problem that we faced was the health of children on Nauru was deteriorating rapidly. Their mental health was spiraling downwards. And we applied our framework, our strategic litigation framework, to that problem. We formed a working group which involved the Refugee Council of Australia, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, Refugee Legal, and many others. We involved major law firms too. We developed a legal strategy to use tort or negligence law to protect those children and have them medically evacuated to Australia. And it was a novel strategy, not without legal risk and risk to families emotionally if we failed. These were very, very traumatized children and parents. We developed a narrative in conjunction with our partners around the cruelty of the Australian government towards vulnerable children. And then we planned and delivered a coordinated advocacy and legal campaign. So our campaign commenced in about 2017, just before Christmas, for a very young child who was actively, and this is, I'm going to raise a traumatic issue of suicide. This child was actively suicidal. And we went before a federal court judge and were able to convince that judge that this was a life or death situation and that the government had a duty of care to take this child to Australia for the psychiatric treatment that he required. On top of that, the Australian Medical Association began to get involved with the campaign, and so did World Vision. And momentum started building for change. The government's cruelty was exposed, and within 6 months, all the children were evacuated off Nauru with their families. And in 2018 alone, we, through our court cases, brought around 150 people to Australia for medical care. Now, off the back of that campaign, and I'm not suggesting that we were solely responsible for this, it was a partnership. The Medivac laws were passed when Malcolm Turnbull left Parliament and he was replaced by Karen Phelps. She held the balance of power, and the Medivac laws brought a further about 500 people to Australia because they desperately needed medical care. Now, if you recall, I mentioned the classical definition of strategic litigation, which seeks outcomes with a long-term impact that goes beyond the origins of the complaint or the issue involved. And I think that the cases for the children off Nauru did that. Not only were they successful in bringing desperately needed families and their children to Australia for care, but they have recently been used. Our precedent was recently used by lawyers who were fighting a coal mine, and they used our cases on the basis that the minister who was going to approve a coal mine had a duty of care to protect the health and futures of all our children. So that case was used, the cases that were used to get children off Nauru are now being used, the precedent is now being used to protect our children's future from environmental disaster. So that's how strategic litigation can create change immediately and in the future. And I'm hoping that together we can all address the problems that have been placed in front of us and come up with solutions that will create real change and that will resonate in the future for people with disabilities. So thank you for being involved in our hackathon, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks very much, George. I think the participants are very, very lucky having you there to guide them in this situation, being a real veteran of strategic litigation. And I particularly like the idea that strategic litigation has long-term outcomes. that's going to be something that people are going to really have to focus on, I think, in preparing their pitches. I'd now like to invite Katja Malakias, an award-winning inclusion and human rights advocate and lawyer, to share her insights on the importance of advocacy. Katja?
Good afternoon, everyone, and Rob. Katja Malakias speaking. Thank you also, Rob, for your generous introduction. It's a privilege to be here and to be part of this important event, which I'm joining from Wajak country, Perth, Western Australia. So I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional custodians of this land and the traditional custodians of the many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations and their elders past and present. I would also like to acknowledge people with disability who have led their struggle for disability human rights, equality and inclusion. As a non-disabled person who's speaking to the context of disability, as the parent of a child with a disability and an advocate for his rights, I'm indebted to them for their contributions, achievements and continuing guidance. And my brief today is to give you an overview of advocacy as a precursor to a more practical workshop session, which will be part of next week's Hack Day, about how you can use advocacy in your Hack Challenge statements, each of which begins with the words, how do we or how can we, which is much more than just a legal question. So as a lawyer, the parent of a child with a disability and a founder and director of disability organisations, I've come to understand the different ways in which the term advocacy is understood across these domains. And I think that this should be our starting point, ensuring that as lawyers and disability advocates, we have a shared understanding of the different dimensions of advocacy and how they may be relevant to the way that we can together tackle some of the injustices facing disabled Australians. So what is advocacy? There are many different definitions, but at the core of each, advocacy refers to action taken to promote the interests or cause of an individual or a group. So for lawyers, though, the term advocacy has a particular context-specific meaning, and it refers to the use of legal skills to put forward a particular argument to a court or a counterparty with a view to persuading them to adopt a position or to make a decision that is favourable to the person for whom you're advocating. Now, in the context of disability, the term advocacy also encompasses the idea of promoting the interests of a person or group, and it also involves skill, but it's not limited to legal argument, and it has a number of important dimensions. So you may or may not have heard of the term self-advocacy, which is most commonly used in relation to and by organisations that represent people with intellectual disability. And it means what it sounds like. It refers to individuals with disability speaking up for themselves to communicate their rights, needs, preferences and aspirations. Now, it's interesting that when non-disabled people do these things, it's not characterised as advocacy. It's just speaking up for yourself. But for many disabled people and for some people with disability, that there are many barriers to speaking up. And in many cases, they may need support and assistance to do this effectively. This may be because of accessibility barriers or communication barriers that makes it more difficult for them to assert their rights and to have their opinions heard. But it may also be because they are at greater risk of not being heard or being dismissed as a result of being perceived to be vulnerable or not capable of agency. Now, the disability self-advocacy movement actually began in Sweden in the late 1960s with the objective of supporting people with intellectual disability to have a say about how they wanted to be treated. And then it spread to the United States and Europe in the 1970s. But while it shares similar values with other movements to give marginalised people a stronger voice, it has a specific focus on providing individual supports and addressing accessibility barriers. The advocacy movement, the self-advocacy movement, was also the start of a challenge to move from substituted decision-making for people with intellectual disability in particular to supported decision-making, which is reflected in Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on Equal Recognition Before the Law. and which adopts a supported decision-making model in Article 12.3 by requiring state parties to take appropriate measures to provide access by people with disabilities to the support that they may require in exercising their legal capacity. Now, I know the disability advocates here today will be aware of the contentiousness of legal guardianship from a human rights perspective, and in light of Article 12, and most of you will have seen the media coverage of Britney Spears' efforts to have her conservatorship terminated. This case has actually helped to raise important questions about conservatorship and guardianship, but also about the role of lawyers in those processes. It's a really interesting and rich topic beyond today's scope, but what I would say is that any advocacy involving people with disability needs to place their human rights and perspectives, not the beliefs and assumptions of their advocates or the people who are in supporting roles, at the centre of it. A rights-based approach must always be the backbone of any advocacy strategy. Now, the other two main forms of disability advocacy that we talk about in the disability sector are individual advocacy and systemic advocacy. Individual advocacy refers to the situation where an individual advocate works to promote the interests of an individual. For example, the parent of a student with a disability who's not receiving supports and accommodations at school may seek out the services of an advocate to act for their child's interests in engaging with the school. Individual advocates will bring specific knowledge and skills about systems and processes to achieve an outcome for the person they're representing. Legal advocacy generally takes the form of individual advocacy, but is limited to legal issues, while individual advocacy services provided by disability organisations don't usually extend to giving legal advice. What this sometimes means is that legal arguments or levers are overlooked in disability advocacy. The best outcome for individuals are usually best achieved when you bring legal knowledge and disability advocacy approaches together. The term systemic advocacy refers to the use of advocacy to work towards making positive system-wide change for a whole group of people. The system can be legislation or laws, government policy, or systems, or even community attitudes. And strategic litigation is in effect a form of systemic advocacy to achieve change for a whole group of people, but it relies on individual cases as a catalyst for broader change. In most cases, the objective of strategic litigation will be to change the law by challenging the way it's interpreted or applied, or to test its scope, which is clearly the domain of legal skill and expertise. However, strategic litigation, as George was just talking about, can also act as a catalyst to publicly expose inequality or unfairness in systems, engage media interest, create public debate, empower marginalised groups to have a voice in that debate, and build pressure for change. This may in turn lead to an opportunity to participate in that process of change, such as by being involved in policy reviews, systemic improvements. I would say that strategic litigation for disability justice is an opportunity to bring together the diverse skills, experiences and approaches of lawyers and disability advocates to enhance as well as to extend the impact of litigation outcomes. For example, self-advocacy and individual stories can provide powerful storytelling opportunities to spark broader change. Systemic advocates can bring expertise about the different tactics and techniques they use to run campaigns, engage their constituents, craft and disseminate messages for maximum cut-through. Sometimes lawyers aren't so great at that. We use too many words. And pressure decision makers to make the changes that are being sought. One example that everyone will be familiar with will be the Every Australian Counts campaign that ran for many years, and that had a strategy around achieving an outcome that encompassed many different elements. While litigation is obviously at the core of strategic litigation, it's not the end goal. It is only one tool in achieving justice for people with disability. So even failed litigation can help to build a foundation for further action and future change if it's combined with broader advocacy strategy and efforts. As a lawyer who's also in the disability advocate space, I really appreciate having legal training and skill, but I've also come to realize that it's quite easy to become trapped by your specialization and to stay in that sort of familiar comfort zone of legal thinking and legal outcomes, and you can sometimes fail to see the wood for the trees. And that broader perspective and approach is something that I've had the privilege to see in action from advocates and disability representative organisations. So I'm really looking forward to exploring at next week's hack session some of the more practical aspects of building an advocacy strategy around litigation. But my parting thought to everyone participating is to start thinking innovatively and collaboratively about how different advocacy approaches can complement strategic litigation and to help maximise the impact of strategic litigation in challenging the injustices facing disabled Australians and achieving much needed change. So that is all from me. Thank you very much, and I'm really excited and looking forward to this.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Katja. That was amazing. And what I know now is that advocacy means many things and that it's critically important to affect change. So even a failed strategic litigation can still have a very positive impact and create change if it's been run together with the right advocacy. So participants, you have a very, very big task ahead of you to create an overall strategy for the question that you're answering, not just in terms of strategic litigation, but also in terms of advocacy. I'd like to just switch over to Rachel from Swivel Creative, who can then talk us through briefly the visualization process, which might also help. Rachel? We might be stuck here. Just a moment. I'm not sure whether I'm on at the moment or I'm not. Looks like I am, because fortunately for me, I can see Sean interpreting what I'm saying. Whilst we wait to see, to get Rachel maybe to come on and tell us a bit about visualization, let me just say this. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this session. I'd especially like to thank my fellow NJP colleagues who have put an incredible amount of work in the background to make this possible. I'd like to thank the Auslan interpreters. Thank you so much for very, very capably translating what we're saying. Thanks also to the sponsors. I'm really excited about what's to come next week. And I just want to say thanks again. It may be that we can't get Rachel to come on to assist us on the visualization. So that might be something that we leave for the next day. Thanks very much, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you in just over a week's time. Thank you.